Welcome, everyone. We are the Every Student Counts Alliance of Spokane. We are a group of parents and organizations, including TeamChild, ACLU of Washington, Northwest Autism Center, Spokane Regional Health District, NAACP of Spokane, Disability Rights Washington, Northwest Justice Project, League of Education Voters, Maxey Center, SOAR Behavior Center, Services, the ARC of Spokane, and Alliance for a Healthier Generation. I'm gonna ask the other two panelists to introduce themselves. Nikki.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nikki Otero Lockwood. I currently hold an elected position on the board of directors of Spokane Public Schools, making decisions for approximately 30,000 students and one of the biggest employers in our city. I started as a parent, frustrated and isolated in addressing my daughter's educational needs, and moved to being part of the Every Student Counts Alliance, eventually becoming their organizer through my position at the ACLU of Washington, a position I resigned from upon being elected. I'm also part of the planning committee for this wonderful conference and served as the chair of the Outreach and Accessibility Committee. And I'm really excited to see we have participants, and I hope you put in the chat where you're from, and if you're an ESCA member, please put that too. I'll pass it on to Erin.
My name is Erin. I'm a parent member of ESCA with 18 years experience advocating for my own child in the public school system, and 6 of those years are experience with the Every Student Counts Alliance, advocating for all children accessing safe and equitable schooling. And I also have about 13 years experience as a community-based victim advocate here in Spokane, Washington. I have experience negotiating and navigating services through everything from the criminal justice system to the prison industrial complex and social service child welfare agencies and more. I'll pass it over to Dan for the agenda.
Well, first of all, I'll introduce myself. My name is Dan Ophardt, and my pronouns are he, him. I'm an attorney at TeamChild in Spokane and have directly represented many students excluded and arrested from school. The Every Student Counts Alliance was the first time that in my work we focused on organizing around local Spokane education policy regarding arrests and exclusions. The work that we're going to talk about today with these folks and the successes we're going to talk about are the main things that have kept me in this work with a sense of optimism that we actually are making progress towards dismantling unjust systems. And I'll go through the agenda for today. We're going to start with a community leadership portion from Nikki, and then special education reform, and then school policing from me. The special education reform will be by Erin, and then we'll have 10 minutes for question and answer. We also have some videos from other Every Student Counts members who aren't panelists today to get different perspectives from a lot of our membership. And to start that, I have the honor of introducing Brianna Rollins, program coordinator at the Maxey Center.
And just a tip real quick for our audience members, the audio is a little bit faint, so this would be a good opportunity to turn your volume all the way up in case you're having trouble hearing the videos.
I'm Brianna Rollins, and I am a parent of 2 kiddos. One is in Spokane Public Schools at the Spanish Language Immersion Program, and then my youngest will be starting there in the fall. And I came to ESCA just through my internship as a BSW student in social work. And then I just kept going with the group because they were so well organized, and the impact they were having on schools was something that I wanted to be a part of. The Every Student Counts Alliance is a group of parents who came together to decrease discipline and disproportionality and discipline in Spokane Public Schools for students with disabilities and students of color. And then we had a group of organizations like TeamChild and the ARC of Spokane, and the ACLU and several others. And there's a core group of folks who show up every week for the last like 5 years. So the Every Student Council Alliance prompted the superintendent to start the superintendent's work group. And so now we meet quarterly to discuss the discipline rates and ways that we can reduce those rates within the school.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate Brianna introducing our work. We will continue to share parts of that as we go. I guess it's my turn, right?
It is.
All right. So I'm going to start out talking about community leadership, which is what the first slide shares. The Every Student Council Alliance works with administrators and staff in Spokane Public Schools to address the school to prison pipeline issues with results that the district and ESCA can be proud of, while still knowing there's more work to be done. We started this work in 2016. I want to share about the leadership that we've developed, including my own. So I will start with somewhat of a more personal narrative and move out from there. Building leadership among community members has been important for the other results we've achieved and is a constant need for progress. So I am explicitly naming this as a result of our organizing work. A synergy is developed by building parent leadership to stand alongside the other legal, disability, and justice advocates, as well as school district staff and administration. Personally, this work has had a profound effect on me, how I see myself and my role in the community. I'm here speaking as a community leader, and just owning that label was many years in the making. We can move to the next slide, which shows my daughters. I have 2 daughters, 2 amazing, beautiful, creative, intelligent humans who've had very different experiences throughout their schooling. And as of this year, I'm a proud parent of 2 graduates of Spokane Public Schools. One had an IEP related to autism and experienced a suspension related to her disability in elementary school. While I experienced the amazing educational options and educators and feeling like a valued member of the school community for my neurotypical daughter, I often felt alone, frustrated, and like it was our family's individual problem when it came to dealing with my other daughter's special education needs. It was an isolating experience. In trying to advocate for her needs, I started peeling the onion of special education as it existed in our school district, and I got increasingly involved with district-wide advocacy. I met other parents with different stories and experiences, some very hard to hear, very traumatized, all wanting improved special education programming. So this next slide shows disorganizing and reorganizing. I learned the fundamentals of organizing when I got involved with the Spokane Alliance, a regional nonprofit composed of local organizations working for the common good. I learned about the power of collective action and building power to confront power to affect change. I learned by doing. I learned about the policy, gave testimony, and recruited others to help pass a sick and safe leave ordinance in the city of Spokane. Work that got the attention of Governor Inslee and helped fuel the state policy. The other, and I will stay on this slide for now, the other parent advocates and I became disaffected with the school district's SPED committee, working with 3 different SPED directors in 3 years, and decided to employ the organizing tactics outside. This started with disorganizing away from the school district committee that was not making the change we'd hoped for. We attended the first meeting of the then unnamed coalition, that would be the Every Student Council Alliance, that was meeting with school district leadership around Spokane's discipline data in the spring of 2016. We learned about the school to prison pipeline issues. This was new to me, but in that data, I saw my family's story. I saw the other parents' stories, and I knew why some kids showed up on that data, and it was not because they were bad kids. This was not an issue of individual students or family problems. It was systemic, and to me showed the need for change. Assessing the power in the room with the organizational groups represented, we decided to join the work. It would not be parents doing this alone. We can move to the next slide, please. This next slide says Cold Anger. It's the name of a book. about an organizer, Ernesto Cortez, who I got to meet. 2 months after that first meeting, I did a national training with the Industrial Areas Foundation in Chicago. This is the organizing philosophy of Saul Alinsky and that Cesar Chavez used with the farm workers in California. It really solidified the idea I had to organize parents in Spokane Public Schools around the discipline reform work. I felt the components were there to build power. One thing you learn about in organizing is cold anger. That's emotion with some time for reflection and thought to channel that and to take action and make change. I knew there was a lot of cold anger to harness in those parents. So I made it my work to organize parents. No one asked me to, no one appointed me. We can move to the next slide. This next slide is a graphic showing Shirley Chisholm and a quote. I gotta move my chat out of the way. If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And Shirley Chisholm is Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman elected to Congress. I really believe having the legal and other community organizations present helped secure the resolution to work on this issue. The coalition secured a seat at the table, and this is huge. The district agreed to work with us. They were willing to do this with community. I came to one of those early superintendent work group meetings that Brianna mentioned. We early on met every month. 2 parents were designated initially. I was not one of them. No one really knew me, but I asked if it was public and I just showed up. Because everyone else had been designated, they had printed name cards identifying them. I didn't have one, so I was given a piece of paper. I folded it up like a tent and made my own name card. I think of this experience every time I hear that Shirley Chisholm quote about bringing your own folded chair. We need to claim our space. You can bring up the next slide. This next one is like one of those directors things that, and it says action. The ACLU of Washington created an organizer. Oh, no, I'm in the wrong spot. I'm sorry. In 2016, the state required all school districts to update their discipline policies. I saw an opportunity and organized parents to comment at our school board meeting. 5 of us gave testimony. The trauma that some families experience related to suspensions and expulsions is hard to write into a 2, 3, or even 5-minute story. I offered to help families create their testimony, and we had 5 powerful testimonies of families who've experienced suspensions related to their children's special needs. And they also felt safe because they were there with other people. I knew it was powerful. And we showed our value and relevance, and that was just the start of our action. Next slide, please. Next slide shows Black Lens, which is a local newspaper written from the Black perspective in Spokane, and it just shows ACLU parent and student organizer Nikki Lockwood. The ACLU of Washington created an organizer position in Spokane. Recognizing my organizing work, I was selected for the position. This allowed more resources to invest in organizing, helping to get more voices of parents with a particular focus around the intersectionality with race. On a personal note, my husband was happy I was at least getting paid to take on this mission I'd created for myself. You can use the next slide, please. The Every Student Counts Alliance has regular meetings, but as parents, we created our own meeting space. It was a chance to learn organizing skills and gave us time to be prepared for ally and district meetings. And honestly, just to listen to each other. People need to share their story. And at first it can be messy and not something you want to do for the first time on a mic at a podium. You could hear it in their voices. You can hear it in voices sometimes, that relief of feeling heard and feeling validated. We were full partners in this coalition, and we are full partners working with Spokane Public Schools admin and staff doing this reform work. Over the years, our parents, while continuing to share powerful testimony, have gone on to get organizing training. About a dozen of our ESCA members have had the formal training, and many more have had components of it. We've trained each other. We've developed advocacy skills and helped others with theirs. We've followed school board activity, the policy work that regularly happens there, sharing with others around this work. We were often the only ones at school board meetings being present when topics such as discipline, policing, sex ed, school safety, the reopening of school with the pandemic, all those issues related to equity. We were there. We have led community meetings, including the subcommittee work of the superintendent's work group. So we've created those leaders, conducted relational meetings, including with district and community leaders, just countless relational meetings. One of our parents, Julie Shepard, who helped create the videos today, she organized a year of learning sessions around inclusion practices with national experts. She brought that to Spokane. To bring hundreds of parents and educators is really, really important information to move our district forward. The Every Student Counts Alliance parents and parent organizers are serving on 12 local and statewide committees, task force, and work groups in the past year and a half. We want to show Brianna's video now, I believe, just to show the leadership.
So I have recently became a co-facilitator of the subcommittee, the racial equity subcommittee. And so that's something that I'm proud of. We've taken the equity resolution, which ESCA was a major part in prompting the district to even write and sit down and write. And then we took that resolution and turned it into a policy so that way it could be carried out and enforced. So my hope is that the school district will be more welcoming for those families who are of different backgrounds.
Awesome. Next slide, please. Among our accomplishments, I must also include the changing school board and administration. We started this work saying it would take culture change. Well, we now have a majority BIPOC school board, and I am one of those board members. I'm honored to be serving my community, proud to be the first elected Latinx in Spokane, committed to bringing the weight of all of those family stories with me. That always catches me, makes me a little emotional, sorry. To my decisions to work towards equitable education for all our students. Almost a year ago, we passed a historic equity resolution, which Brianna referenced, and we'll put that link to that in the chat. The culture change is happening, and with the equity resolution passed a year ago, the multiple topics that we have talked about for a year, for years within the superintendent's work group were created as action items. You can move to the next slide. We are the leaders we have been waiting for. Where before I felt isolated in my experience advocating for my daughter, this organizing work has helped me find community, get involved, get invited to the table, and now I'm setting the table for our school district. Organizing taught me the importance of acting on my values. As our history shows time and time again, with progress, there is always pushback. It was there last night at our school board meeting around masks and critical race theory. We haven't solved all the injustices, but with broader representation of active leaders, we are in a good position to continue the work of inclusion, anti-racism, and equity. I think it's important to see that building up everyday people from a variety of backgrounds and expertises to own and use their power to work relationally and to see themselves as leaders is a result we must continually be working towards for the common good. Thank you. Pass it back to Erin.
Thank you, Nikki. Got the feels too now. So as I mentioned, I'm a parent organizer and advocate with ESCA. The work that we've done around in the Alliance has fundamentally shifted the culture and face of special education systems in Spokane. And I'm going to share a couple of stories, my own, and I want you to introduce another fierce parent advocate and organizer, Sarah Droz. I do want to give a heads up just because the audio might be a little soft, that you'll want to turn your volume all the way up on your computer to make sure that you can hear. Additionally, some parts of Sarah's story and my own story may contain triggering content related to suspensions, exclusion, isolation, and restraint and arrest. So please take care of yourself And I am going to play Sarah's video next.
My name is Sarah Droz. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a parent member of the Every Student Counts Alliance in Spokane, Washington. I am the mother of Odin Droz. I joined the Every Student Counts Alliance out of necessity. I needed help to advocate for my son Odin. Since kindergarten, school has been extremely intense for Odin. He has met most of his milestones on time. He knew his ABCs, he was reading age-appropriate level, and he loved learning and had a great vocabulary. But he was sent to the principal's office every single day for running, for trying to get away, for non-violent behavior. My heart was broken. My little boy was struggling. Why? I begged for a plan for him for first grade, but the requests and the planning were extremely limited. The teacher for first grade thought I was overreacting. I felt so alone. I knew this was wrong. I tried to be calm and go with the flow. Well, the same pattern, but even worse, suspensions again and again. The saddest part is it could have been prevented. Many horrible days later, an autism diagnosis and a placement committee told me Odin should go to behavior intervention class. It sounded awful. I said no. I wanted him to stay in his neighborhood school. He knew the adults there did not want him anymore, and he felt rejected. So I gave in. 4 school transfers and about 200 isolations and restraints. On top of that, severe PTSD. I would try to ask for better options, but I was met with excuses. The Every Student Counts Alliance allowed me to learn more about my child, about trauma, racism, ableism, autism, disability rights, IEP meetings, behavior intervention plans, healing. I joined the superintendent work group. I was working with them and the school district for change. I have built amazing contacts, allies, and that helped me as a mama. Kept my head up. I went to Olympia twice with my kids, advocating for more resources for public schools, asking for more paraeducators, asking for no more isolation and restraint, asking for more counselors and less police. There is a plethora of healthy learning options and resources out there. There needs to be flexibility. We need to change the learning culture for children. It is so possible to be inclusive and to break the negative behavior cycles that are in our classrooms right now. We can always do better. Well, there's 2 different points of view. I'm very frustrated with the school system. I think they can do better. But when it comes to the Every Student Counts Alliance, I feel stronger. I feel like I have a voice. I feel that I can understand things from a more logical point of view. I understand law, and I know how to advocate for my son. It's important to take it personally, but it's also important not to get too heated. Do your research, learn how to advocate for yourself, find a group like the Every Student Counts Alliance. That's what I gotta say.
Similar to Sarah's and her son's story, which you'll hear in a little bit, my son was born with health impairments and a diagnosis that was labeled as autism and a developmental delay at an early age. He's now an adult. The first time my son was put in handcuffs, it was the 2nd grade. He was refusing to move, laying on the ground after becoming overwhelmed. This was a regular occurrence. He had a hard time processing sometimes. He struggled with communication, and this day he didn't want to join the reading circle. And after refusing prompts from the teacher, a school resource officer was called in, and the resource officer put him in cuffs and walked him through the halls to the office to teach him a lesson. He was then suspended for non-compliant behavior. Formal suspensions started accumulating as he grew through the school system. Between these and other times he was informally pulled out of class for behaviors related to his disability, we estimated that he had spent less than 30 full days in his classroom in his second and third grade years. It felt wrong. I knew that it wasn't normal to go to my child's school every day and take him home. Even when I was armed with knowledge that special education law was not being observed, I may as well have been wrong for all the progress that it got at advocating on our own behalves in that system. I have so many frustrating and exhausting and traumatizing examples that I could share. But what I want to say and how it felt was that this system had more resources, manpower, and authority at its disposal than I had the time or ability to fix or fight on my own. My son overall would experience 9 separate placements in this school system. He would attend 7 separate schools, and he was robbed each time of the normalcy and community that he craved. We were reassured over and over at every single placement into these self-contained classrooms that were increasingly more restrictive and where he experienced more isolation, that this is going to be the place where the resources are. You know, this new placement is going to have the resources and support that you need. And as he grew, the consequences for non-compliance grew too. Isolation rooms and arrests were now resources at the school's disposal. It was at his 6th placement that he was referred to Eagle Peak. Eagle Peak is a standalone school that was intended to provide behavioral modification and other services. The majority of the youth that were housed at the school were students with IEPs or other special education needs. It was the most restricted placement in the public school system. The school did have resources, but not the kind that we imagined. There were locked rooms, officers employed by the school, and a bench that children were made to sit on when all the other rooms used to isolate and restrain kids were already occupied. The record keeping was close to non-existent, and when matched against reports of how frequently kids were removed from classes, there was just no record of it. You know, kids would be pulled out constantly. My son was living in a perpetual state of fear, avoidance, and trauma. The rest that was our lowest point started as routine. The school counselor called me and asked me to come down to the school to pick up my son. He was being suspended because he didn't want to go back to class after being locked in an isolation room. And in the time it took me to drive to the school, the officer was brought in to move him to the bench outside of the school. He was restrained and arrested. And when I arrived, the scene was chaotic. There were officers and staff standing around at this entrance, a vestibule, standing over my child who was on the ground. And he was laying on his stomach, shoulders heaving and sobbing, with his hands pulled behind his back in cuffs. He was shouting and breathing hard, possibly sobbing. And I can't remember everything that happened after this, but I remember this distinct feeling of not reacting. I couldn't, because if I was upset, they were going to keep him on the ground for longer. And I thought that he couldn't breathe. I was terrified that he would be hurt. I had nightmares for years after this that I was watching my son die on the floor of his school. And this doesn't even speak to the trauma that he experienced going through it. This was the school that had the best resources that the district could provide us, and it was unacceptable. When my fear settled, I was angry. I talked to attorneys, I contemplated lawsuits, and an attorney that I was familiar with, Rosie Thurman of TeamChild, also a ESCA member, reached out and invited me to a school board meeting where parents were going to speak regarding some experiences around exclusionary discipline and arrests. I seized the opportunity. This is also where I met Nikki, who was organizing parents and helping prepare statements for this school board meeting. I wasn't very optimistic. I spent the last 12 years trying to get this broken system to hear me, pleading and arguing with the same system. This board oversaw with only worsening results. So, but I was desperate. So I took my 3 minutes and put all of my grief and anger out there. And I summarized how we came to Eagle Peak, the arrest, and my plea for them to do something. And then this really amazing thing happened. These other parents started getting up and talking. Attorneys and advocates told stories, talked about arrest rates, suspensions, and through those experiences, I didn't just feel validated, I wasn't alone, you know? If the board dismissed me, well, I wasn't alone anymore. And not only wasn't I alone, but other people cared about this too. And ESCA was doing something about it. The board was paying attention. Shortly after this, Nikki reached out to me and asked if I wanted to meet the superintendent and talk about Eagle Peak. And just like that, I was sitting at the Starbucks with this woman who ran the school system, and it was unbelievable. She listened to me for over an hour. It was at this meeting we first learned about a audit that was going to come to Spokane Public Schools to evaluate our special education programming. And I shared with her that I thought that it was too late for my kid, that the damage that was done to him, to our family, couldn't be undone. But what I wanted was for kids entering the special education system today to never have an experience like ours. There was no reason that we should have ended up in Eagle Peak, and I wanted to make sure no other child or family would ever experience what we did. Nothing changed overnight, but we started meeting with district administrators, policymakers, elected officials, news reporters, and more. When asked what I wanted, I would say over and over, stop arresting kids, stop suspending kids, close Eagle Peak. In ESCA, other parents were talking about their experiences in schools all over the district that echoed the same themes of equity, discrimination, exclusion, arrests, and unmet needs. And this is a slide just showing some of the data that we looked at together. So this is ranging from 2014 to 2021 that shows the overall drop in district-wide exclusions. So not only was I not alone, but there were people with depths of knowledge and skills that were motivated to share resources, time, and energy to make change happen. The parents and organizational members of ESCA met together regularly. We planned workshops, listening sessions, and a lot of the other things Nikki already referenced. We staggered ourselves across all sorts of tasks, work groups, meetings, and shared the workload. As a parent, having the backing and support of these organizations and advocates gave power to our lived experiences and made our stories actionable. The audit the district coordinated was an independent review of this entire special education system done by a program called the Urban Collaborative for Special Education. I might have that name wrong. When they came, we made sure the parents were on the agenda to be heard as well. I begged them to look at Eagle Peak. Eagle Peak was a distilled example of everything that was going wrong in this system. And we were anticipating this report coming back. And when it did, there were dozens of observations and recommendations for the district. I've listed a few of them here. I'm not going to read through them all, but it was incredibly impactful to see that we weren't crazy. We were not imagining this happening. Like other people saw what was wrong here too. And the school had a lot of work to do in order to address some of these recommendations. Very validating personally to me. Eagle Peak was the only school named by name in the entire report and consisted of about 4 separate observations and recommendations across the report. One quote from that, the Urban Collaborative report that was validating to me, it said, many staff believe that the only way for students with behavioral and mental health challenges to receive support was to refer them to the district's BI program or one of the programs at Eagle Peak. And that very much echoed our lived experience, being placed in so many different programs in schools and that constant refrain of not enough resources to support your child. ESCA members participated monthly in meetings for 3 years where the district shared all of their data on suspensions, restraints, arrests, equity, breaking down data into minute detail and letting us question them. Those meetings were sometimes hard and uncomfortable. Sometimes when the district hoped for better results, they weren't there, but they were transparent and accountable, and we kept the pressure on. In the superintendent's work group for restorative practices, we helped write better policy like 3240. Which was a policy that addressed discipline and conduct. And we helped make sure that it included restorative practices and regular reviews of data addressing disproportionality and discipline. In the special education subcommittee, we wrote the notice of procedures for families and students about their rights and options in special education. We addressed training for teachers, social and emotional learning curriculum was implemented, change was happening across the district, and we addressed the use of force policy on a policing subcommittee. Isolations and restraints dropped, arrests dropped. The elementary BI programming was overhauled because of our voices. My voice made a difference. The Every Student Council Alliance made these things happen, and there are so many other accomplishments that we don't have time to cover in a 1-hour presentation. What this resulted in, and one of the biggest accomplishments to me, is in the spring of 2019, the assistant superintendent announced the closure of Eagle Peak. Closing Eagle Peak made sense. The data spelled out unequivocally a story of a broken system that couldn't be reformed. The Urban Collaborative report was part of this decision, but so was our voices. We did that. Eagle Peak was the source of so much trauma for my child. It was also the school that my son had spent over 5 years of his life in. The longest he had attended any school in his life. Faults aside, he made his first friends in his life there and thought of spending his senior year anywhere else with peers and strangers in a building he didn't know was too much. He graduated in a ceremony of 2 during the pandemic. After the closure, there's still so much work to do. We are following the dissolution of Eagle Peak programming across the district. And I asked to be on the committee to ensure that a new Eagle Peak isn't created, so we have oversight and input on these programs. I'm the sole committee member that was directly impacted by Eagle Peak. And I started with Sarah's story, and I want to close with her son, Odin, in his own words. And I just want to say that when I first met Sarah, I remember her expressing fear that her son, Odin, would end up at Eagle Peak. And one of the greatest accomplishments that we have is that he never will. ESCA did that. Our voices did that. Our power did that. And I'm going to turn it over to Odin now.
Hey everyone. So this is my story. I'm Odin, by the way. I am 13 years old. My pronouns are he, him. I have autism. I am a member of the Every Student Council Alliance. We believe in inclusive, free, appropriate education. I believe in advocating for myself and others. I have a difficult time in school since kindergarten. I felt very overwhelmed in stressful environments due to my autism, including school. My brain tells me to get away when stressed. I also have a rough time with change, especially when it does not feel right. This makes me want to leave. school staff do not like when they restrain me, and that makes things worse for me and them. Being restrained hurt. I've had bruises, and the room they put you in gives me claustrophobia. I tried to have a hoodie on so I could use it as a pillow to feel better. Being restrained hurt my relationships with teachers and staff. It caused me to be diagnosed with PTSD. I hope that other students go to a counselor if they have been restrained and put into a room, because it helps. No one should be treated like that. School should be a fun, safe place to learn and grow. I love to learn. I hope to go to college and enjoy my career. Yeah, I'm doing online school now, and yeah, it just feels nice, and I can go take breaks if I need to, right? I can go get some water and stuff, right? Yeah. My favorite subject is like science and math and stuff like that. I'm actually gonna become a scientist when I grow up. And yeah.
I am going to pass it off to Dan to talk a little bit about school policing.
Just want to thank Odin for that video. Odin, your perspective and your story goes into all the work we've ever done, and we are so proud of you, and thank you for sharing your story with us today. I'm going to start our story about school policing. And can I have the next slide, Erin? To start that, I'm going to go back to this original community meeting that we convened with the school district in May 2016. I found an old roster of the people from that meeting and categorized them into different groups, and was surprised to find that there were as many attorneys there as folks who were there primarily as parents. Let me tell you, that's no longer the case. We are definitely not a group of many attorneys at this point. I think that often in legal aid, we are constrained by the need for quick demonstrated results, and we often want to have direct asks based on clear law and expect that if we can't do that in one area, we should spend our limited resources elsewhere. Indeed, many legal aid lawyers came to and went from this work quickly after sitting through a few of our sometimes meandering meetings. But I put up this slide to show that our work was shaped in no small part by the legal presence. We approached the district with the data that showed systemic discrimination through disproportionality in arrests and exclusions. Many lawyers were at the table. Though we did not keep up that full pressure with a dozen attorneys at every meeting, I do think that this multi-pronged approach, with families telling their powerful stories that you've heard today, and also attorneys there with the implicit threat of civil rights litigation, had a lasting effect. Indeed, as one of the attorneys to have never left this table, I have seen real successes, not only in these amazing stories of leadership and building power, but success in data. I am grateful as a TeamChild attorney that I've been able to invest time in this work. I've heard in many legal aid circles that we should all be working to put ourselves out of jobs, and this work is doing that. There are extraordinarily fewer arrests and suspensions out of Spokane Public Schools than there were 5 years ago, and I'm uplifted in the rest of my work by working with these parent leaders in this space. Erin, can I have the next slide? At that first meeting in 2016, Renee Brost shared the story of her 10-year-old son diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, who was tackled by staff and still restrained on the ground by the time Renee reached the school, leaving him in fear and with nightmares of being taken to the ground by officers. Several of us kept hearing stories like theirs, and we saw the data that Spokane Public Schools was arresting nearly 1,000 students per year, disproportionately Black, Indigenous, and students of color, and students with disabilities. Next slide. This was a quote from the same Inlander article as Renee's story regarding the ridiculousness of both the substance and volume of arrests at that time. Krista Elliott, who was a juvenile public defender and at that first meeting in May, said that 20 of her 57 new cases that month were for something that happened at school, and that very few were for serious offenses. And then she held the district accountable for statements it had made in that meeting just a month earlier about not wanting to arrest or suspend that many students. The beginning of those conversations in 2016 were very basic. The director of campus safety, a former sheriff, spoke with us like the thought of reducing arrests had never been spoken about before. He spoke like they had never even questioned the necessity of the nearly 1,000 arrests per year. We recommended them work with an organization called Strategies for Youth to advise them to train on some immediate changes they could make, and they did. Next slide. And those early conversations and minor decision-making changes were enough to reduce the overall number of arrests quite a bit, as you can see, nearly 90% the following year. I think that this area was where a lot of people could most easily understand the school to prison pipeline, which was a term that was already pretty common at that point in 2016, but few people had really dug into all of its meaning. And this was the surface level area that the district could be confronted with the data and acknowledge its role. During this early time, relationships between district administrators and community folks formed and created a space that we could move on to other things like anti-racism training and training for working with students with disabilities. And we also helped write a unique safety procedure limiting the types of offenses that the district would arrest for that required intensive data tracking and reporting, and created a complaint procedure. It was the first comprehensive school policing policy from any school board in the state. And on the next slide, just as we used our legal arm to apply some pressure early on, we also used it to give props as a positive reinforcement. The ACLU of Washington in its 2017 report highlighted this new policy as one of the best in the state. Just a year removed from this terrible data, the district was being acknowledged for reducing its arrests and for improving policy. That, I think, helped keep them at the table while we continued to call for them to drastically change or dismantle the system altogether. Next slide, please. The reason we continued to discuss this was that while the overall arrests had been reduced, the racial and disabilities disproportionality didn't change at all. Along with that data, there was one very publicized incident of a white district resource officer tackling a Black high school student to the ground and holding him down with his knee on the back of his neck. The officer had previous public allegations of excessive force before he was even hired by the district. Following this, our organizer helped recruit testimonies with multiple ESCA parents and allies speaking, many of whom had never before testified at the school board. The student's mom unexpectedly spoke to the board after receiving so much support from other speakers. That officer was forced out. Eventually, the interim safety director who supported him was also pushed to resign from the school board, and the student recently received a money settlement from the district. This was just one scene of demonstrated community power we did not see at school meetings before we started this work. Another one was where the NAACP chapter president, Curtis Robinson, asked the district in the midst of hiring a new campus safety director whether it was intending to strengthen the system or dismantled it. Move on to the next slide, please. Following the murder of George Floyd, last year, we organized around a direct demand that police be removed from Spokane Public Schools. In June 2020, community turned out at a board meeting to support the school board's equity resolution, which committed to Spokane Public Schools staff no longer arresting any students. The board passed it unanimously. Just 5 years removed from Spokane school staff arresting nearly 1,000 students in a year. This was a commitment that was received with joy and hope for a more inclusive district for students. That night, even on Zoom, was a memory I'll always have, where the power of community could be viscerally felt. After that, community members had a say in hiring the new campus safety director, who has a vision of equity and believes that students shouldn't be arrested from schools. Community members are currently involved in rewriting the safety policy again to make sure this progress doesn't erode with other personnel in place in the future. The community has power and is using it, and that is making all the difference. This story summarizes that, as the district acknowledged that it was the advocates who were repeatedly asking these questions, full of imagination and hope for a drastically different world following the dismantling of unjust systems. With the removal of police from Spokane Public Schools, with the dismantling of a white-only school board, as Nikki spoke about, and with the closing of Eagle Peak that Erin spoke about, we are doing just that. And we've got some time for some questions if you have any.
I did just put the equity resolution link into the chat, but we also, I think everybody gets a copy of the slides. So we have some resources here that we thought would be helpful.
We do have a question from Francis. Are there any similar schools that we need to shut down across the state referencing Eagle Peak type schools? I will answer that from my perspective. It's likely, yes. I think that's why I highlighted that I'm part of a committee that's called, very memorable, Technical Advisory Committee, where we're reviewing essentially the breakaway schools that formed after Eagle Peak was dissolved. And those schools, while they're not Eagle Peak itself, and a lot of the environmental factors that led to Eagle Peak being what it was were addressed, there's always a risk that there's going to be another Eagle Peak. One of the particular items that was noted in the Urban Collaborative report and review was its isolation from the district, its isolation from and disconnection from the special education programming at the district, and the teacher's own isolation from like the policies and practices that gen ed classrooms and the administrators, were doing. And that disconnection led to ultimately abuses. One of the things that we look at in the Technical Advisory Committee is are the practices of the new schools aligning? Are they connected to the district? And I think that there's always a risk for those schools that are kind of out there doing their own thing for being, and this sounds insensitive, but like dumping grounds for students that they don't want to deal with, that take up too much resources. So I have no doubt that there are schools all over Washington state that, have severe issues with disproportionate discipline and targeting special education students. I don't know all of their names, but maybe somebody smarter than me on this call can mention them. I'm all about naming names.
Yeah, I would say my knowledge is really on the local school district, so I'm not sure. I hope that sharing this information we did today would be something other communities could use to organize around, making needed change. I guess I'll just say that. And if anybody needs to connect us with other folks, doing education equity work, please do.
We have a question from Katie Miner. Is there student participation in ESCA efforts? If so, what does their participation look like? Nikki, do you want to take this one? I know that
I will take it.
Yeah.
I will say we did not organize students to the same level we organize parents. Maybe that's because of my age or something. We did have students participate throughout the years. And I would say primarily it was parents of students that were active. And so they saw their parents and they were invited in by their parents. So we did have, I would say, at least a dozen powerful testimony of students throughout the years. And then we connected with some, like, especially North Central High School had an amazing student of color group called Shades. We listened to them, we connected with them, and they showed up at school board to do their own work. I would say also as an organizer, I was able to connect with groups, like there were social justice groups at some high schools. I would connect with them, let them know what we were doing, invite them in, go to their spaces and their meetings, share what we were doing. So there was some awareness, but as students come and go, and then my role changed, that wasn't able to be developed more fully. It's certainly an area where I think we need more student organizing happening.
Any other questions that we may have missed? And if you would be more comfortable raising your hand to ask your question, you're more than welcome to.
Even if there's any, like, something we didn't hit on that you were hoping to hear, you know, we just only had so much time, but we still have 3 minutes. We might be able to do it. Let us know. I also appreciate all the other ESCA members that were here today, cheering us on.
Oh, Bonnie, could you help me with the raised hand? Oh, no, hold on, wait. I do see the raised hand.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
I was going to type something, but I'm not going to be able to type fast enough. So my name is Eloise Barcius, and I'm a legal aid director in Wenatchee, Washington. And you talked about your board meeting that you just had yesterday, I think it was, and critical race theory and all these things that are coming forward. And I don't want to dive too much into the political element of all of these school boards and what's sort of happening for them, but it was so moving, all the things that you shared. And I'm someone who's working to be more involved in my school board as well. So just really inspired, but the first thing I just kept thinking of is, like, how do we connect these sort of progressive school board members with each other across the state? Because I think I hear your message, and I think folks over here are feeling alone in how to do this work. And maybe it's been done. Again, I'm really new to the school board part of all this, but is that something or some resources that you could speak to about how we can, you know, unite in that work and just the way that you're doing and all the good work, and you have so many good resources, but just actually talking to each other?
Do you mean specifically as school board members?
Yeah, and school board members, and just the work that you're doing, it's more than just reading. It's just more than reading the resource, but like actually sharing these. You're so moved by your personal, actual speaking and talking.
Thank you. You know, we thought about, so, you know, school boards have the Washington State School Directors Association. And I was telling Erin, maybe we should present at that so that they can see what is possible when you really are in relationship with community and not, like, you know, keeping them at arm's length. They're afraid of looking at the data, you know, afraid of being uncomfortable with what your school district is doing, you know, instead of saying, let's do this, let's fix this together, because we do love our kids. So we thought about that. There are, you know, those WASDA conferences. I just recently, there's a women of color school board members group. So if you know of anyone that fits that, you know, we connect, we have our space to talk. And these anti-mask critical race theory, you know, folks are, it's intense. It's a lot to take in. It's emotionally exhausting. So we are trying to support each other. And so I would say that WASDA, and, you know, just give them my email. I'm fine with that too, you know.
Yeah,
I'm an organizer. I want to talk one-on-one with people. I like to be in relationship and figure out shared interest and where we can work together. It seems like there is a focus towards equity at the state and national level. that is getting a lot of pushback, but at the same time, it is there. And I feel really good about the work we've been doing to make that progress.
Thank you so much. And Nikki, I don't know if you were willing to drop your email in the chat, but
sure.
And again, thank you all so much. This is, you should, I hope that you'll share this, because I was just thinking like, I want to share this with so many people, because there's layers of civil legal aid, access to justice, and then just equity. All the things you're speaking about are so relevant to our communities beyond the direct legal aid work that we're doing. So thank you, thank you.
It's helpful to hear that, because we put our hearts out there and, you know, pretty vulnerable and really uncomfortable for a lot of times, but we know that it's important and we felt good about it. So I'm glad that it was helpful to you. Makes it all worth it. There's just an item in the chat, and yes, isolation and restraint is now no longer something we do in Spokane Public Schools. I don't know if we spoke to that. But yeah, that just changed recently, just recently. And again, it's something that families have been traumatized with, and we're not going to do anymore. And it's the right move. And we just have to maintain that accountability to those commitments and those practices.
All right, it's 11:32. Do we have any final questions before we close our session?
Thank you for all the help you've done, by the way. I just wanted to say that before we go, right? Thank you for all your help, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Odin.
Thanks, Odin. I hope you have a great day. You did good work today.
Thank you, Odin, and everyone.